All right, welcome to the Atheist Experience Live. This is Season 20, Episode 12. We've been on longer than NCIS, I think.
Wow.
Definitely, yeah.
That's wild.
I think they're in like their 13th or 14th year or something, which is awesome. We are live. Today is Sunday, March 27th, 2016. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Tracie Harris.
Hello. Hello.
Don't worship her, that's my job.
Yeah.
So we're live from Austin, sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a non-profit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. That's a statement that I haven't said in the introduction in I don't know how many years. Isn't it weird how the brain works? Just sometimes you fall into the rhythm that you used to do, even though you haven't. So how are you?
I'm doing great.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we've got phone lines almost full. It's Easter.
It is. Had a fun Easter. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, along with all of the fun things, there was also a fairly sizable suicide bombing in Pakistan that I heard about just as I was driving in.
Yeah.
And it's prompted a lot of discussions because it falls on the heels of a bombing in Brussels and a bombing in Baghdad, some of which have been attributed to ISIS or ISIL. And the Pakistan bombing, I think the Taliban is taking credit for that.
The latest one, yeah.
Yeah.
The Pakistani one.
And specifically went to a park and were targeting supposedly Christians and Christian families celebrating Easter.
Yeah.
So it's a big, ugly, violent, slaughtering mess everywhere in the world. And it seems to just keep tying to Islam or Islamism in some form or another.
Yeah.
And that's prompted some comments.
We had the Iraq soccer stadium, and then there was the Brussels one that sort of started off the week. And I mean, yeah, it's just been a mess.
And so there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes along with this. I know you wanted to talk about some comments in the response to it.
Yeah, some very public commentary that was made. And so, yeah, I saw the interview where Ted Cruz commented about additional police patrols in Muslim neighborhoods to check for radicalization. And that was specifically how it was expressed during the original interview. And I know that they have revised that statement somewhat, clarified it. You know, call it what you want. Either they have, like you said earlier, added more nuance, perhaps, or perhaps backpedaling a little bit, or perhaps, I mean, I don't know what to label it. I just know that the message that came out a few days after the original message was slightly different than the message as it was originally expressed, which was that they wanted police patrols in Muslim neighborhoods to check for radicalization.
Yeah, the slight change, it's almost like somebody didn't really know anything about the topic and said something, and then somebody came in and gave them the Cliff Notes version, so now they're an expert on it.
Yeah, or at least a little more informed. But what I found interesting was that before the clarifications came out, literally that morning I watched the interview. And that was on CNN. And then that afternoon I came home from work, I put on the news, and one of the first things I saw was a local station here in Austin asking our police chief, Art Acevedo, what he would do if he was required to go out and patrol Muslim neighborhoods as described in this interview. And he said that he would be willing to step up the patrols in Muslim neighborhoods, but then he clarified right away and said that he would want to be making sure that the neighborhoods were protected from misguided citizens who thought it was okay to paint a community with a broad brush.
Yeah.
So it was this really concise, spot-on response from Art Acevedo, who I think, every now and then he'll say something that I just want to cheer. And that was one of those moments.
And I think following up, one of my favorite comments, I believe, I'm not sure I'm correct, that it came from the head of the New York City Police Department, who pointed out that he'd like to make Ted Cruz aware that there are over 900 Muslims with guns that he can introduce him to at any point because they all work for the New York City Police Department. There are over 900 working officers who are Muslim.
Yeah.
But I thought that the way he phrased it was far better than I did. The idea, oh my gosh, there's 900 Muslims with guns and you know where they are? Why haven't you done anything? Well, we'd like to give them a raise, actually.
Yeah. Well, it made me think a little bit about, I know that a lot of times people will talk about the differences in their situations based on their communities. Mm-hmm. And so it made me think about my community, like here in Austin, what is the community like, and what is my experience with the Muslim community? What is my experience with terrorism here in Austin? And what is my experience with, that violence on that level? The few things that I could recall were a November 2014 attack where a gentleman went and shot up a courthouse in the Mexican consulate in the early morning hours, just as the nightclubs were opening up, like right before Thanksgiving. So it was a holiday. The nightclubs were ending their nights. People were about to exit and be in the streets, and here was this guy just packed to the gills with guns downtown, shooting up these buildings, and he had to be taken down. He, if I remember right, his name was Larry McQuinlan. And he was, I believe, shot in the street, so I think he was killed, and we don't really know what his motivation was, but he appeared to target government buildings. And we had a very similar thing here as well, where in February 2010, we had an actual suicide pilot who flew a plane into a building, which was literally on my commute home.
It was across the street from where I was working at the time.
This was wild, that he flew this plane into a building. His name was Andrew Joseph Stack III, and he had a beef, again, with the government. He had an issue with the IRS and decided to fly his plane into the building. Took out himself and an Army veteran, a retired Army veteran, who was working at the government offices. And then the only sort of problem that I could recall with anything to do with Islam or a mosque here in the Austin area was when someone vandalized a Pflugerville mosque.
Yeah.
I was like, this is the violent episode that I remember with Islam in my community was some idiot vandalized a mosque and was never caught. Smeared feces all over the facade, tore up a Quran, put it on the front of the building. I mean, none of these acts are acceptable. And they're not acceptable for any reason. There was no justification for what any of these people did. And I'm sure that in their minds they felt it was justified or they wouldn't have done it, but it wasn't. So it made me think about when I was a Christian, because the Christianity I was raised in, I remember having conversations with you where you would talk about things like Elijah and the bear, and you would say, we never read this at church. Like, we skipped all these horrendous stories. And I was like, oh no, where I went to church, we read them, and they told us about how God was totally justified killing children. If they were mocking a prophet, they deserved to be torn apart by a bear.
Yes.
So my brand of Christianity was like a lot more intense, I think, than some other people's. And we were pretty much taught to obey, and that whatever God did was okay, and we just didn't understand it. If that was, I think, my woo.
That was the gods
That was
smiling
the
down on you.
refreshing sound. Anyway, I thought about how different people that I'd met who were Christians sort of interpreted that the authority of God, or the authority of the Bible, or the authority of their religious doctrines, and how that integrated with their own conscience, their own ideas. And there were a handful of different ways that I observed people dealing with how to treat other people and what was the right way to act based on what they were being told by a particular religious set of rules and what they themselves were able to ingest and take away from that. One of the things was that some people judged what was right based on their own moral compass, and if the religious doctrines didn't align, they just left the religion. So they would say, this is garbage, this cannot be right, this is teaching something wrong, and they would just abandon the religion. Some people left the church because they couldn't agree with what was being said. But then there were other people that judged what was right based on their own moral compass, and then they would conform their religious teaching to fit their own moral code. So they would say, I want this to be okay, and it doesn't sound like the Bible is saying that this is okay, and so I need to find a way to make the doctrines fit my beliefs, and I will find a way to integrate both so that I can proceed with what I feel is correct, or what I perceive to be correct for whatever reasons, and then I am just going to say that this religious doctrine does in fact support that. So they would sort of drag the doctrine along in whatever way was required in order to support what they already, for whatever reason, felt was justified as right action. And then when that would be if, unfortunately, that was whether their intentions toward other people were good or not, right? So this is why you had situations where during abolition, people that owned slaves and people that were abolitionists who both were arguing that the Bible supported what they believed. It wasn't, a lot of the people that were that owned slaves during that time had a lot of reason to want to own them. I mean, it was beneficial to them as the owners to be able to continue this practice. It wasn't just a matter of doing what they felt the Bible allowed. It was about the idea of, this benefits me and I don't want to give it up and I'm going to proceed with this, and I think the Bible also supports it. And in the meantime, you had other people who said this is completely wrong and this is not okay to do to other people, and I think the Bible supports this, right? So you just had these people kind of going head to head with what they thought was okay. Some of them didn't really have a problem or felt like it was all right to own slaves, and some of them felt like this was completely wrong, but they both just sort of went head to head and then dragged their doctrines along to say, you know, this supports what I want to do.
Right.
And then you had people that judge what's right based on their own moral compass, but then they would disregard that if the religious teachings didn't align. So I actually saw situations where people were willing to support something harmful if they were convinced the doctrine required it, even if they couldn't justify it. And in some cases, those people felt wrong doing the thing they were supposed to do, but they didn't trust their own judgment enough to say, I'm not going to do this. They literally felt like, if this is what God wants me to do, if this is what the Bible is telling me to do, and I don't feel like it's the right thing to do, I need to trust God. And so they would proceed basically saying the authority is morally correct, and if I don't understand it and I feel bad about it, I just need to trust that the authority is correct and that I don't understand it, and that's why I'm feeling bad. And so they literally would just go with what they were told to do, even though they felt it wasn't correct. It wasn't that they felt okay with it, it was that they felt like not being okay with it was a problem with them and not the authority.
You don't know what God knows.
Right, so you can't judge, and so you just need to trust and go with it. Excuse me. And then there were other people that I saw that didn't even seem to have a moral compass. They didn't make any sort of moral judgment or use morality in any way. They just simply followed a religious doctrine, and as they understood it, regardless of what was required. And these were people that I can only describe at best as being amoral, and then they were ready to harm or help. They didn't exercise any responsibility toward their actions beyond what they perceived to be a responsibility to blindly obey whatever the religion required. God said it, and I'm required to do it, and that's how I take responsibility. I'm taking responsibility for what I'm required to do by God, not what I feel like I should do or what I can justify.
Far more robotic in the slave for Christ.
It's like the bumper sticker that says, you know, God, something like God said it, I believe it, that's it.
And actually, that got modified to God said it, that's it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter whether you believe it according to them.
Yeah, you just do it.
It's funny because we get to this thing where, you're probably getting ready to get to this,
no, that's okay.
Where there's essentially a no true Scotsman issue here going on. How do you determine what is or isn't, for example, in this case that we're talking about, Christianity? Mm-hmm. And is it based on what the Holy Book says that they all point to? Do you base it on what the religious governing bodies say? The Pope or the head of any particular collection, like the Southern Baptist Convention? Do you base it on what any individual denomination or church does? Is it left up to the individuals? Is it about the majority? You know, what counts as Christianity in this sense? And the real answer, as far as I can tell, is we really don't know. I mean, if you say that what you're doing and you're a Christian and you try to tie it back to your doctrine, the only thing we can really do, as far as I'm concerned, is go back to the book that you're citing, because I have no access to your personal revelation.
Right.
So I can go back to the book you're citing and say, yeah, what you're advocating is in your book, and it seems to be the way you're viewing it. Or I don't find that in your book, and you seem to be adding something to it. Where's the justification for that? I'll let you keep going on your thing.
No, that's fine.
because I'm going to flip this in a minute to talk about Islam, so I want to make sure we...
Yeah, I actually wanted to go back and just say that, still in keeping with my own experience of here in Austin and the communities here in Austin, when I visited the mosque here in Austin, they had an open house, like an ongoing open house with information sessions on, like an Islam 101, and you can do an all-day course on Saturday, or you can go in different nights of the week and take different courses. But I was treated very hospitably by people who seemed decent and non-threatening, and I listened to them explain their religious views and their perspectives on life, and I saw some areas where we agreed, and there were other areas where we had some really deep ideological differences where I really did not agree. Now
the conspiracy theorists would just say that of course they have to treat you nice, because that's the way they buffalo you.
Nobody I met that day, guests or members of the mosque, made me feel anything but welcome, and my companions and I felt completely okay asking questions, and we did. We asked what I felt were some tough questions. And the imam, to his credit, did his best to respond honestly. There were a few times when he admitted that the questions were difficult ones for him to answer, where he had to stop and think, or where I would have a part B. He would answer something and I would say, well, that's not really what I'm asking, and then I would put the rest of the question, and he really would take some time and sit and think, and he would say, I have to think about this from a perspective of what if someone came to me with this problem, what if they were asking me for counseling, here's what I would hope I would say to them. And
I don't know about anybody else, but I'd pay real money to watch Tracie sit down with a Muslim imam and have these conversations.
Well, sometimes he was just explaining doctrines.
Right.
Like somebody would say, what does Islam say about this, or what is the idea, how do you handle this or that? And they would just explain, like, this is how this is usually handled from a doctrinal perspective. But then there were other times where you really saw him digging deep and having to consider how he felt and how his ideology played into his perspectives about how people should be treated.
Right.
Because there were some conflicts in some of the presentation of this is how I think people should be treated, and then how people would be treated in certain situations. And so I was asking, how do you reconcile these things?
There was a panel discussion that I think it was at Reason Fest in Kansas that JT and some others took part with, and they had a Muslim on the panel, and I think that he was probably treated worse than he deserved based on his willingness to come there and try to defend this. But he also said some things that were laughable in the face of what we already know about the general Islamic view of respect for women. And clearly you're using that word in a way that doesn't match what the rest of us are using.
That would be one of my deep ideological differences.
Yes. It's like, it reminds me very much of when I hear people talk about God's love, and it doesn't matter whether it's coming from Islam or Christianity, God's love. He has a very different usage of that word than what I would be accustomed to. And the same thing with respect for women, which was in scare quotes for the people who are listening on audio.
Yeah. But when I started thinking about this, and I started thinking about my past experience with what people would justify, like within my own church, and how these were things that you were just like, well, in our church, they just skipped this stuff. They didn't even address it. And I'm like, wow, in my church, they said, this is okay.
It was either skipped or glossed over.
Yeah.
It was kind of I have this great book that I bought. It's an antique. I'll probably have to bring it in sometime, and it is Bible stories specifically written for kids. And it's not like a cartoony book. It's written at like a first grade level, and it's really manipulative. I mean, talking about Abraham and Isaac, they actually change it so that they start with God asking Abraham to bring Isaac, and then they gradually replace the word God with love in all caps. So love asked Abraham to give up his son Isaac.
That's creepy.
And there's all kind.
That's creepy.
I'm going to do a whole series of videos on the
Give up
stories
his
and
like murder his son.
Give him up to love.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. But when I started to think about this, I realized that for me it's less important what the label is that's on somebody than how they determine the best way to treat other people. So no matter what label someone wears, the option to take responsibility for their own actions and to make judgments is available to that person. I mean, people do it even when they're under authoritarian regimes where they say, the Bible is saying one thing, but I don't think that's right, so I'm going to change that a little bit to sort of suit what I wish was right, because I don't believe God would say that. God would not do something that bad. And whether I agree with the way they justify it or not if ultimately they come to the conclusion that, you have to treat people well, and if the Bible is not describing that, I'm going to make it do whatever it needs to do to make it describe that, because I need to treat people well, and I'm not going to not treat people well.
You are better than your God. You're better than your holy book.
You have that option to take responsibility for your own actions and make judgments. It's available to you even when you are participating in what is normally considered to be an authoritarian system. And in the end, we do what we do for reasons that we consider as justification, and we, each of us, as individuals, have to answer to one another, because society is going to bear the consequences of what we as individuals choose to do as members of a greater collective. So it doesn't matter to me what the Bible or the Quran told someone to do. It matters to me what they ultimately did, and whether they actually manifested or concern for other human beings when they did it. And that's kind of where I land on this.
Yeah. And we're going to get to callers in just a minute, but I'm going to kind of take what you were talking about and spin it off so that we're specifically, in many cases, addressing Islam. And that's because this comes up all the time, and we're in a week where there have been a number of different bombings that a number of different Islamic groups have taken credit for.
Yeah, talk about
and
ISIS.
there are a bunch of people who don't include any nuance or attempt at accuracy. And there are some people who go way too far in applying nuance. And a lot of these people are at odds. I mean, in some cases, for example, Tracie and I don't agree on everything. Sorry. So we're on the same show. So aren't we a hive mind? Isn't it my job to keep Tracie in line? Isn't it her job to keep me in line? Don't both of our reputations depend on whether or not, what some random jackass thinks about somebody else? So don't saddle Tracie with what I've said. Don't saddle me with what Tracie said. Don't saddle any of us with what Russell has said or Don has said or whatever. You can... The fact that we're all on the Atheist Experience doesn't mean we're a homogenous collective. Similarly, when you look at Christianity, there's the Bible. There's some versions of the Bible that have extra books, Catholics, and then Mormons have added a whole other thing on there. There's a lot of different denominations. There are different views about all of this. And so you have Christianity, and then you have different denominations of Christians that disagree on various things. Well, there's a distinction between Islam, the religion, and Islamism, which is sort of the political wing that ties itself to Islam, that wants to impose Sharia law on everybody in the world, basically, is the short version of Islamism. Now, I object to both of them. One far more strongly than the other. I object to Islam because it hasn't met its burden of proof, and I find that the teachings within the Quran to be immoral, offensive, obscene, in the same way that I find offensive and immoral and obscene teachings in the Bible. It hasn't met its burden of proof, it's irrational, and it seems to be doing a lot to encourage groups of people to act in certain ways. But, like I was saying before, how do we tell what is the true Christianity or the true Islam? Is it the Holy Book, the Quran, the Bible? Well, I don't know. Is it what a particular imam is teaching, a particular school, a particular denomination? Is it about, do Sunnis have it right? Do Shias have it right? There are a number of different implementations of Sharia law as well, depending on which school they're coming from. So I do make a distinction between Islam and Islamism, in the same way that I make a distinction between, for example, Christianity and Christian dominionism, which is basically analogous to Islamism. Christian dominionists want to have God and their particular version of Christianity in charge of everything. That's their goal. The big difference is that Christian dominionists in the United States don't really have a power base with which to operate. They don't, have a standing army and massive funds and support. They tried to do a mass exodus to South Carolina, and I was like, I really like South Carolina, but I think I might give that up if we could get all those dominionists in one area. I think I might. But we also have a constitution that protects religious liberty and the freedom of expression and other things. And the system that we have here helps keep extremist groups in check a little bit. What you have outside of the United States and other places are systems that don't necessarily do that. And you have systems that are theocracies, where Islamists have taken over with their particular group. And you have to remember, you hear about the Taliban all the time. The Taliban takes responsible for these bombings today. The Taliban's only existed probably for less time than Ice Baby has existed. This is a particular group that came about in the early 90s, and it's kind of a throwback to the more literal, more dogmatic views within Islam. And so I don't want to paint every Muslim with the same broad brush. That's the kind of idiocy that we see from candidates who want to patrol people based on their religion, who are fearful that because someone associates with a religion that they are therefore likely to be a threat, or likely to be a bigger threat than somebody else. And Islam may be the most dangerous religion in the world worldwide. But that doesn't mean, as Tracie was pointing out, that it's the most dangerous religion here in Austin.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it's the most dangerous religion in the United States, or pick some other country. There are going to be different problems in different areas. So I found myself actually agreeing with a politician who I despise about the Islam and Islamism thing. So how do we tell? Well, one of the things that defines a religion to outsiders is what they perceive as the majority. And when you have a political wing to your religion that is well armed, that has massive amounts of control in certain countries' governments, that is also actively seeking control in other countries' governments, that is waging a war on dissidents from within its own religion, the different varieties of Islam. The Taliban is going after ISIL, and these people are going after other, Shia Muslims, etc. You have all of this conflict going on. There's a power base there that becomes, whether it's accurate or not, the de facto perception of your religion. Now, it's easy to say, this is your damn religion, go clean it up yourselves. That's easy to say, but when a terrible regime advocating the most literal, the most dogmatic, the most oppressive to civil rights version of a religion is the one with the power, it's very difficult for the peace-loving people who disagree with those aspects of their religion to actually rise up and do something about it. And those are the cases where you might need support from outsiders. So I don't go the full-on, let's throw so much nuance in there that Islam is a religion of peace. Bullshit. There are good people, there are bad people in all religions and outside of religions. And there are religions that advocate for all kinds of horrific things. I saw a study that shows that the Bible actually advocates for more violence than the Quran. There's various little complaints and nuances about that. The point is, they all advocate for terrible things. The difference is that Christianity isn't currently in a position in most places where it can do the worst things from a position of power. And Islam is. The Islamists are in positions of power around the world where they can and do take actions that violate the civil rights of individuals, the human rights of individuals, and kill people at a much greater rate than we see from just an abortion clinic bomber, or even the KKK, which might be the extremist wing of the Christian religion. They identify as Christian, they want to make appeals to their particular interpretation of what God wants from their understanding of the Bible, and generally speaking, other Christians shut them down. Not always, but generally speaking, I think the KKK has about maybe 3,000 members at last statistic I saw. They're a joke. They are an embarrassment, and they're not a grand threat, even with their grand dragon and grand poobah. That's not the same for Islam, for Islamists who are trying to implement Sharia law. The only nuanced distinction that I make and continue to make is to make sure that we're not painting with a brush that is so broad that we violate people's religious freedoms, and that we say, you are associated with this religion, which is generally frickin' terrible, and therefore you are probably terrible too. Because that doesn't follow. It's actually a fallacy to make that. You might say, well, more likely to be. But these new regimes are fairly new. and they are, despite having a good power base, moderately small. But because of the position they hold, they end up defining what Islam is, even to the peaceful people who have to live under that regime. They don't have the power base to rise up, and that's why I support going after Islamism with everything that we've got in order to empower people to change the regimes, to take back their religion, to end. Now, when I say take back the religion, I'm not saying that the peace-loving people have the right version of the religion. I'm saying I'd rather their version become the more popular one. And then we can get back to pointing out how they still don't have any good reason to believe this, how it still advocates for terrible things even though they're not following it. And we can point out that they've been dragged out of the Dark Ages and are now cherry-picking their religion the same way Christians did, and good for them, and why don't we chuck all that shit out? But that's all I had to say about Islam. We've got Mike in San Jose. Thanks for waiting.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
This is, hi, doing pretty good. Hi, Matt and Tracy.
Hello.
This is Mike. I'm from San Jose. I guess to introduce myself, I'm a agnostic / theist. I was raised in a Christian home, but, I had my doubts like everybody else. And recently, I started to really see some truth in Christianity, I guess, specifically. And I guess I had some questions for Matt.
When you say you recently saw some truth in Christianity, I was going to say I don't know what that means. I don't fully understand what you mean by that, because I'm okay with the idea that there's plenty of truth in plenty of places. I can point to truthful teachings within the Bible and factual information within the Bible, but that doesn't tell me anything at all about whether or not the supernatural claims are in fact true.
I can see your point, and
Okay.
I guess that kind of draws into my question about truth. It's like that, and I said, I'm starting to see Christianity as true. That doesn't mean I see everything about it as true, but I see portions of it as true as of now. And I guess I see everybody else around me kind of sees it as true too. The majority of the world is Christian, or I wouldn't say majority, but I guess that's the largest religion in the world. And I see a lot of Christians around me, and they all seem to think that it's true, at least the core fundamentals of it. And everybody, as you know, we have different kinds of sects. So my question to you really is, do you believe that anybody can really know the truth about God? Can anybody have that knowledge?
I don't think that we have any reason to believe that anyone does have that knowledge. Whether or not it's impossible to ever have such knowledge is an open question. In order for us to be able to say that we confirmed that we had a good understanding of this God, somebody would need to demonstrate, define the God, show that he exists, and show how we're able to confirm the supernatural. Because most of the gods from modern religions, when you drill down to what they're actually advocating, they're all unfalsifiable and untestable.
That's exactly my point. It's unfalsifiable and untestable.
Sure.
We really can't know, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can know.
Well, yeah,
So
but also I would say that because it's untestable and unfalsifiable, it's not just that nobody can know, it's that you cannot have a reasonably, rationally justified belief. And so the people who are believing this, absent an ability to test it, are being irrational. I mean,
Okay.
and those people who freely acknowledge that this is untestable and then go on to say that they believe, I think are being doubly irrational, because they acknowledge there's a big problem here, we can't verify this, and yet they believe anyway. Whereas there are people who think that this is verifiable, that they have hard evidence.
I think we're that's where I really want to ask you is, like, aren't you kind of confusing the notion of believing and knowing? I mean, if you have the justifiable, rational evidence for God, then wouldn't you be knowing that God exists?
Perhaps, but knowledge is a subset of belief. Belief just means that you accept a proposition. Knowledge, philosophically, is defined as justified true belief. I have problems with that definition. But most often, when we talk about knowledge, colloquially, somebody's just expressing a confidence level. So they're, hey, I believe this, and then somebody else will say, well, I know it. And all they mean is I really, 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 really believe it.
Really believe it.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be, if you can't verify it, why would you believe it? Like, why wouldn't you just wait until it can be verified and then decide then say, oh, okay, now it's confirmed?
Well, I guess like Matt said, there's really no way to know. So believing something is really just putting it above any other explanation, any alternative.
But what I'm saying is, where's the pressure to make a determination about whether or not you accept it as true? Like, why would you do that before you could verify it? Yeah, you can do that, but what I'm asking is, is somebody putting pressure on you to make a decision about whether or not it's true? And if not, then why not just say, I'm not going to make a decision until there's some kind of evidence to base that belief on?
Well, for me personally, I guess you're asking me personally. So for me personally, I recently had an experience that I guess you can call supernatural, and that's what led me to look for answers, not just in Christianity, but in, many different religions. And
so there's an equivocation fallacy that's going on here, because you talked about people acknowledge that you can't know. Well, can't know isn't necessarily talking about knowledge. When somebody says you can't know this, and we talk about that it's untestable, unfalsifiable, in that context of can't know, what you're really saying is there's not enough information to reach a reasonable position on this. It's not just when somebody says, hey, you can't know that, this is unknowable, they're not just making a claim about knowledge, they're also making a claim that rational belief isn't justified as well. And when you say that you had an experience that you could label or you could call supernatural, I could call anything supernatural. What's the justification for saying that the cause is supernatural?
There is really no justification. It's just my, I guess, way of explaining it, just so that most people can understand it easily.
I don't understand it.
It's an experience. Yeah, it's an experience that I can't really explain rationally or explain in any other terms. Therefore, it led me to look for an answer at religion or any other kind of place where they give you answers to it.
That is entirely fallacious. You just acknowledge that you had an experience for which you don't have an explanation. And so you went looking to religions for an explanation. Why on earth would you think that religions would have any explanatory power for what you experienced?
Because religions are, I guess, places or congregations where people discuss the supernatural and have different opinions about the supernatural.
Okay, but I can go to a Bigfoot club. That doesn't mean they know anything about Bigfoot or that Bigfoot's real.
Well, I mean, if you went to a Bigfoot club, I think they'd have a substantial amount of their own, what they consider to be evidence for Bigfoot being real. It's a Bigfoot club.
Yeah. And how is that actually, what reason do I have to think that they're correct?
I guess you would have to look at all of the evidence they present to you. I'm not in the Bigfoot club, so I can't really say that. But I can speak for Christianity. There's the Bible to start, and there's a lot of evidence within the Bible.
There's evidence within the Bible? Because as far as I'm concerned, the Bible is a list of claims.
Well, I guess, prophecy could be considered an evidential claim that if something happens. But it depends on really your interpretation. I really don't want to go that far because, like I said earlier, I'm not entirely believing that the Bible is the Word of God, first of all.
I don't know.
To make that clear.
I get that you don't entirely believe it. I'm wondering why you believe it at all and what parts you do believe. Because I could see believing perhaps the historical accounts, which have been externally confirmed about, people, places, and things, but you seem to be believing it in part on supernatural claims, and I don't know what the
justification. Specifically, I'm suggesting that I believe that a heaven exists.
Why?
That I believe that it has to do with my experience.
Okay.
So let's just suppose, I don't want to come out here and be all like talking about my personal life. So let's just suppose I had a near-death experience.
Okay.
And I had this experience where I saw heaven, and I came back from this experience, and some people might not say I was dead, some people might say I was dreaming, but this experience I had was very similar to what a lot of other people describe in near-death experiences.
Can we immediately just point out that let's say I was abducted by aliens, or I had an experience that I felt I was abducted by aliens, and my experience was similar to what other people reported about when they were abducted by aliens. Does that mean any of us have a good reason to believe that we were actually abducted by aliens?
Well, if substantial number of people came out and said they were abducted by aliens, I think that would be a pretty good reason to believe that there's something going on.
No. Why does the number of people who say something have any impact on whether or not it's true? Don't you realize? For ages,
just the number of people. That would be a starting point, and then you would have to, of course, look at the evidence they present.
Yes. If tons of people came forward and said something, that might be enough to investigate. Now, how do we investigate it?
You would have to look at the evidence.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Well, evidence by definition is anything that leads you to conclude something to be true.
Evidence of the facts presented in support of a proposition.
I mean, can I ask you, do you believe that UFOs exist? Do you believe that they exist?
No.
You don't believe that unidentified flying objects in the sky exist?
Oh, sure.
I thought you were talking about the context of the alien abductions that he had just brought up.
I was still going within the context of aliens. Are there?
I'm going to get there.
Are there? So first of all, are there? I still don't necessarily believe that UFO is justified. Are there unidentified sightings that people presume are in fact flying objects? There's not a demonstration of flying until you actually get to the point where we've showed it's a flying object, or not even a demonstration that it's an object until you get past. Basically, people observe something and they don't have an explanation for it, and they call it a UFO. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, we're not saying it's aliens, but it's definitely a UFO." Well, UFO is unidentified flying object. You haven't demonstrated that it's flying or that it's an object. All you have is something that's unidentified.
But we have demonstrated that it exists.
No, you haven't. You've demonstrated that people saw something. If you haven't demonstrated that what they saw is even real. Don't you realize people see things that aren't actually real?
Well, yeah, but how do you demonstrate something is real if you don't rely on your sight? And that's not the most basic sense of data that you can collect.
I'm sorry, but that's not the way we determine that something's real, just because somebody saw it. You have to investigate and actually give evidence in favor of it. People see things, you just acknowledge that people see things, and now you want to say that that's the primary way that we should go about determining whether something's real, is if somebody saw something.
Okay. Well, they also bring forth, evidence with their sightings. They have videotapes, video footage.
Do you believe that people have been abducted by aliens?
Well, I don't really know. I don't know. I haven't seen evidence for that specifically, so I can't really say.
Okay.
I've heard many claims, but I don't know. So
you don't hold it as true at this point?
No.
Okay.
No,
and yet you are okay with the heaven idea.
But I see, I have to admit that, there are flying objects in the sky. I'm watching the news recently over the past, couple of years. It seems like those sightings have been increasing, and they're actually, on Fox News, ABC News, NBC News. They're all over the news. Every 2-3 months, you'll have a UFO sighting somewhere, in the sky. Yeah, given
the pervasiveness of this, why is it that you don't believe the alien abduction stories, but you do believe a heaven?
Because my personal experience. That's my personal. So what led me to all of this is my personal experience. There's no evidence for my personal experience, of course. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what led me to even have my personal experience in the first place was the fact that I believe.
Wow, that's kind of...
I don't really have a way of evaluating this without you getting more specific about your personal experience.
I think about it, and it's like if I was dying, for example, and my brain was starved of oxygen, and I had some weird vision thing, and it matched some things that other people saw, like a bright light and a feeling of peace. All of us have human brains, and perhaps when a brain is dying from oxygen deprivation, this is what happens. Like maybe your body starts to pump out endorphins and dopamine because you're dying, and it's trying to keep you from being in any kind of pain or distress, and so you lose vision. Like for example, I'm a blood donor, and sometimes when I go home, if I'm standing up too long, everything sort of whites out and I can't see and I have to sit down. And I could definitely understand why a body would flood you with good feeling brain chemicals when you're about to die. and how that could be interpreted in your culturally, common context. But at the same time, when I come out of it, I'm not going to trust my brain or my experience or perception when I know that I had an oxygen-deprived brain that was pumping this experience and perception out.
Not only that, but it misunderstands the problems with memory. It's not, so your brain is in this deprived state while you're nearing death, but not dead, or maybe even if you pass over some point and are resuscitated. But the memory is formed after you actually revive.
Right.
And your brain is trying to make sense of a weird experience and creates a narrative for it.
Yeah, the recall might not even be...
So we've tested near-death experiences, we've tested the out-of-body experiences, and they fail. So given
I think that's highly debatable whether you can even test that.
Sure,
but,
it's really easy.
Yeah.
For people who are in an operating room, you can put a note up on top of a file cabinet.
That's assuming you know how to test if heaven exists or what kind of state heaven is.
This
or
isn't
whether
a test.
people can do that in heaven.
This isn't Mike. This isn't a test for heaven existing. This is a test of the specific facts of claims of near-death experience. If the specific facts fail, why on earth should we believe the extra facts about a heaven?
Well, you say facts, right? But these aren't facts. They're specific claims about heaven. So you can't test a claim if that claim is just from a witness or witness testimony about heaven. That's the
Yes, we have no.
Kind of
I agree. We have no way of investigating and confirming the existence of heaven.
And I agree with Tracie as well. I'm sorry, Tracie.
That's okay.
With that's a possible alternative explanation to.
Okay, now which one is
experience.
actually requires more assumptions?
I would believe that Tracie's requires more assumptions because it's pretty well known fact that heaven exists
Tracie
across.
Wait, you say that Tracie's carries more assumptions because it's a pretty well-known fact that heaven exists?
Well, at least in our modern times, most people seem to believe it. So
okay, stop. That doesn't make it a well-known fact. That makes it an agreed-upon opinion. What I'm talking about is which one requires more assumptions. Tracie's includes nothing but the natural world. You're adding a whole nother supernatural realm to it. So which one of them actually includes more assumptions?
Well, judging from the fact that I'm not really a scientist, and neither is Tracie, I would say
How is that at all relevant to my question?
Because you have to know exactly how the brain works.
No, you don't have to be.
Well, no, we know. Well, wait a
Stop.
second. We know that the brain dies as it's deprived of oxygen. It starts to die within a few. I mean, this is not something that you have to be a neurologist to understand.
But you
Your
don't
brain
know
will
that the
die.
brain's going to make you see heaven.
But you do understand that when people are deprived of oxygen, and there are specific limits where you'll start to have brain damage, so that when you are brought back, your brain is damaged in certain ways because of that oxygen deprivation, correct? I mean, that's not even...
Not all the time.
No, I'm saying that there are certain
Wow.
limits where you go beyond, where the brain doesn't have oxygen for certain amounts
You're
of
also
time,
aware that-
and it starts to damage. Parts of the brain will start to die as you don't have oxygen. This goes for your body as well.
Okay,
I mean, you
I guess
can't
this is my
deprive...
point, though.
You're also... Mike, You're also aware that not everybody sees the same thing, that near-death experiences vary, and they don't even always tie to the same religious imagery, right?
Did you put them on hold?
For a particular imagery is a funny word because a lot of the near-death experiences that I've heard about, they don't really describe imagery at all.
Okay, then you haven't remotely studied this. You just haven't. You do realize that people who are Catholic are more likely to see, you do realize that people who are Catholic are more likely to see the Virgin Mary and saints, and people who are Protestant are less likely to see those, and people who have near-death experiences from other religions are likely to see the imagery associated with their religion, right? Have you at least looked into it that far?
I mean, I know it's possible that they can assume that's what they saw, and they come back and say, this is what I think I saw, but none of them claim that that is specifically what they saw and that they know it.
You're wrong.
You're
You're just factually freaking wrong. You're just making shit up. Nobody comes back and says this. Yeah, they do. They come back and say all kinds of things like this. You're so desperate to find some way out of the logical arguments. We don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to have any other understanding.
We could hold you underwater to demonstrate the brain dies without oxygen, but it's like, at some point you just have to...
It doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if we know anything at all about the brain. We don't have to know anything about science. All we have to do is look at the claims. And here we have a natural world where something unexplained has happened. And we are looking for explanations that fit as many of the facts as possible. Let's build a model that is the best explanation of those facts. Do Tracie or I or any scientist on the planet, are we absolutely sure that near-death experiences where people see an afterlife, see a heaven, are false? No. And that's not what anybody's claiming. But you have looked at this based on your own experience and decided, the best explanation is for me to take this natural world and add a whole nother supernatural element to it.
That hasn't been demonstrated yet.
That hasn't been demonstrated. That you agree there's no mechanism by which we can investigate it. It becomes an unfalsifiable proposition. And your justification for this is that other people have made this same mistake in reason. That other people have these beliefs. And every time we try to point out some of this, it's, well, you guys aren't scientists. Okay, it's not relevant. What's relevant is the logical argument and the evidence supporting it. That's it. That's all that's ever relevant. The logical arguments and the evidence supporting it. And when you can expose that the logical argument supporting something is fallacious, then the conclusion is we have no way of telling if the conclusion is true or not from that logical argument. We have no way of telling. And if you then say, well, I'm going to believe it because it just seems true to me, then you're demonstrating that you don't actually care about what's true. You care about what feels good. You're so discomforted by the idea of not knowing that you're willing to go with, hey, this is what most people believe, so I'll just run with it. Sorry, that's not a good reason to believe things.
Yeah, and it's weird to me how sometimes people are very, very convinced by a personal experience that defies everything they have learned up to that point about the world around them. So instead of saying this is so outside the range of reality that there must be something wrong with my perception, they go right to it's so outside the range of reality that it has to be supernatural.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even occur to them that a perception could be deceptive or could be incorrect or could be, you could have a psychotic moment. And that's the other thing that's kind of interesting to me is that even mentally healthy people that are relatively mentally well, can have like a psychotic snap, like that just is temporary. That's a temporal thing.
It doesn't even have to be that kind of a snap.
No, it doesn't. I mean,
we make mistakes in thinking all the time. Magicians exploit that.
Yeah.
I can't count the number of times I've seen magicians and mentalists do a trick, and somebody's like, "Ooh, they've got supernatural powers."
How many times have you driven with a car full of people down a desert road and seen water up ahead on the road, and it's not there? It's always ahead of you.
It's an unidentified wet object. Turns out, not wet, not an object.
It's just it looks like water, though.
It does.
It looks just like water.
Okay, well, before we get all wet, let's go to Peter in Holland. Thanks for waiting.
Hi there.
Hi, Peter.
Good evening. Well, this is a little unsuspected because I tried to call in an earlier show that didn't work, and now having my two favorite hosts, that's a bit of a surprise. I assume you got the question I had for you. I'm active on Twitter as an atheist, and I talk to theists and see what I can get out of it. I grew up an atheist in most complete atheist community. So the first time I was confronted with a belief was when it got serious was when I was 21. So it's bit like watching the Looney Tunes actually for me, because it's hard to grasp what people actually believe. But
to be fair, though, both of us actually believed that stuff.
Yeah, well, I've watched every show for I think the past 10 years, so I've got a good grasp of your past. So, but I've got a follower on Twitter. He actually called in once in a show where the both of you were the host. And this week he came with a question, and I can't help him. He's an atheist. His parents are, as far as I know, believers and strong believers, and they are anti-vaxxers. And he's seriously concerned that he's not getting his vaccinations. Is there anything you guys have to help him out to what he could do?
How old? Do you have an idea how old he is?
Yeah, I know how old he is. He's 15.
Okay, and where does he? I mean, I don't mean specifically, but like, is he in the United States? Where did you say he was?
He's in the United States. He's in Missouri.
Okay, I mean, at 15, I don't know if you could appeal that or not.
I'm pretty sure if he was serious about it, he could, petition for emancipation, at least on this issue.
Yeah.
I find it's a little strange that he's 15 and I don't know what vaccinations he has or hasn't had, but there's a lot of good resources online, specifically with information about how to argue against anti-vaxxers. But for a 15-year-old, I'm not completely sure, but I would imagine they could call somebody.
Well, he could go talk to his school counselor about it and see if they maybe have some resources, or go to a local clinic and even try to talk to someone there and just say that he has these concerns and he's...
I actually suggested that. And he's afraid a school council will contact his parents, and
what are they going to do? Take the vaccine out of him?
No, but he's afraid they will contact him before anything happens, and his parents don't know he's an atheist. They do know, I think, he's an atheist. What they don't know is that he's on Twitter and he's talking to people.
So there's always you always have to exercise a lot of caution when you're talking to or about somebody else's minor child.
I agree.
And
I agree.
I agree with Tracie that he should talk to the school nurse in particular, as well as any other person in depending on where he lives. If they find out he hasn't actually had vaccinations and it's the right ones, they might remove him from school.
What I found out so far is that in Missouri there might be that the parents need to sign if he wants to get vaccinated. Yeah. And because I'm from Holland. I'm not sure what the laws are.
And I'm from Missouri, and I still don't know.
But I mean, he could, for example, see if there's any sort of free legal advice available. There are some groups that do help people out legally to try and give them some guidance on whether or not they need to contact a solicitor or recommend a solicitor. But he might reach out to some sort of legal hotline or something and just say, look, I've got this question and I feel like my parents are putting my health at risk by disallowing these vaccines. I would try a lot of routes. I mean, I guess I can understand a little bit. I mean, we have to think in terms of him being a minor and living at home and having to deal with fallout if his parents do get upset with this. I mean, he could lose, a lot by upsetting them, clearly.
Yeah, there's no easy answer.
That's my concern.
Yeah, there's no easy answer, and I don't know that this is remotely the right place to try to address it, other than recommend that he talk to the authorities at his school, and because they'll know the law in Missouri, hopefully, better than any of us do, and it's possible they may have dealt with this type of thing before, and will have better resources than an atheist show in Texas and a caller lovingly calling from Holland.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this was actually the spur of the moment, because I got that question this week, and well, it kept me busy somehow. It to me it's very strange that people just because of their beliefs stop vaccinating their kids.
It's not strange to me at all.
Kids at risk.
It's not strange to me at all. Parents love their kids. Parents act on what they think is the best information, and if you manage to convince them that the best thing to do is this, then they're going to do that. And so it's not surprising. The cure for all of this is to continue getting better information out and into the hands of parents with regard to vaccines and, oh, by the way, religious indoctrination. But on that note, Peter,
you don't have a website or an organization he could contact to get some information?
I have no expertise on vaccination and vaccination
But here's
laws.
the thing. I mean, for example, I know when it comes to the issue of abortion, if a girl is young and she thinks her parents would impede her ability to have an abortion, she can seek to be able to do that without, like, by having the court sort of support her in that, regardless of her parents being against it. And there may be, I don't know if that translates to any kind of a precedent where a kid can generally go forward and say, what my parents are doing to me is not in my best interest, and so I would like the court to make the decision that I can get the vaccinations. I don't know if there's like a way of doing that as well, but it reminds me of the situation in this other case, and I do know that the courts can override the parents' consent in those cases, and I don't know if that's possible with him or not, but it's certainly something that he should look into if he thinks he wants to go that route.
Okay. Well, I actually called in to point him to the show and to see what you guys can come up with. Maybe this is help for him because there's nothing I can do from here. So
yeah, and there may not be much we can do from here either. But if he wants to email us and let us know how it turns out, that's fine as well.
Okay, I'll convey that to him.
Well, thanks for your call and for your concern.
Thanks for having me, and great show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we've got F.A. in British Columbia, Canada. How you doing?
Hi, Matt. I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Did we get your name right?
Yeah.
Yes, you did. Yeah, it's F.A. You got it.
Hey
Hi,
again,
Chris.
F.A.
Hi. So basically, I just want to ask you guys this. Well, I have a question, but first I want to go back to what you guys were talking about the Islam and Islamism a while back. So basically, as you can see from my name, I'm not originally from North America. I'm from Turkey. I moved to Canada 8 years ago, and basically, any Muslim, any moderate Muslim that says, you know what, we have these horrible things in Quran, but we're not taking them literally, because, we're in 2015, 2016, and, we can't be doing those things, beheadings and all those stuff. They're delusional because Allah says that if you don't take every word in Quran, word by word, you're not a Muslim. So let's say there's the quote from Quran. It says that do not befriend Jews and Christians. They are friends of each other, and whoever is an ally to them among you, you're one of them as well. And I just want to know that, what you guys think about this. Because for me, as an atheist, I just think that moderate Muslims are delusional because they're not Muslims, according to Allah.
Oh, I get that. The problem here is I don't get to decide what a true Muslim is. I don't get to decide what a true Christian is, and they don't get to decide what a true atheist or secularist is. it's a complicated mess. And you could make this same argument, by the way, about Christians, where I think it's in Timothy where Paul says that all Scripture is useful for teaching and instruction, and there's other verses about not changing anything, and yet they do.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, if there are moderate and liberal Muslims even who disregard parts of the Quran, I don't care if their holy book says or can be interpreted to say that they're not real Muslims. They're better people.
Right.
So I'm happy with that, but I also, and I've pointed this out with regard to Christianity, when you look at somebody like the Phelps family, and I'm not talking about Nate, I'm talking about Fred Phelps, the Westboro Baptist Church, or somebody like Pastor Steven Anderson, who's gotten a lot of popularity on the internet for his tiny little church and his bigoted, misogynistic views. Most of what they say is biblical. It is right in line with what the book actually says. And most moderate and liberal Christians are cherry picking out of the book. Now, when it comes to which one I have more respect for, it's a difficult decision to make. Because on the one hand, the people who are honestly, seriously not making excuses for the book and following it, they seem to be, to me, the ones that are truly following the only document we have for their religion. On the other hand, I have respect for the people who said, you know what, that stuff's crazy and evil, and we're not going to do that. And so as human beings, I have greater respect for those that have set that aside. And the same is true with Islam. So, I mean, we can say, okay, they're not real Muslims. The problem is, when somebody like me says it, it's absolutely useless. Some jackass atheist in Texas said that moderate Muslims aren't real Muslims. Not only am I not likely to convince anybody other than other atheists and ex-Muslims, which by the way, I'm a huge fan of and supportive of ex-Muslims of North America, but at the end of the day, they're not going to care, and I would prefer to encourage moderate and liberal Muslims over fundamentalist, literalist, dogmatic, jihadist Muslims.
Right. I just thought that, they're delusional. They're not. I understand where you're coming from, but I just think that they need to somehow understand this. But yeah, it's not an easy thing.
That's a
to
job
do.
for fellow Muslims.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't put up the atheist signal. Put up the Muslim bat signal and get them out there to teach them who is and isn't a real Muslim.
Right, yeah. And I also wanted to say one thing. You also talked about the fundamental Christians. As someone from Turkey, when I look at the fundamental Christians, let's say in southern states, and the moderate Muslims, the fundamental Christians look like liberals when you compare them to moderate Muslims. Actually, in many ways, they don't realize this, but I think it has its roots to the Reformation Christianity went through in Europe.
Yeah.
And so when the fundamentalist Christians think that, we believe in Jesus, we're fundamental and all that, actually they're not that fundamental when you compare it to Islam. So I don't know, I just thought I would
No, there was a really good article written by Christopher Hitchens before he died that was, I think it was called The Taming of Islam or something like that, but it was about the idea of how violent and oppressive Christianity was during the times it had power, and how it has just sort of been socially tamed. And his point is that, Islam is kind of at the point where Christianity used to be, and we have to socially tame it in the same way.
It's about, Christianity was dragged kicking and screaming out of the Dark Ages, and now we need to help the world do the same for Islam, because in many ways, it's trying to revert to its darkest ages. I recognize that, and it's like what I was talking about earlier, a lot of it has to do with power base, and Christianity is currently in a position where, despite the fact that it has the numbers, it has a culture that has benefited from the Enlightenment surrounding it, and helping to establish and encourage the laws that protect freedom of religion, and also make sure that we don't have too much entanglement between religion and government. And where I think one of the biggest problems with Islam is where it becomes a theocracy and where people are actively fighting and killing to make it a theocracy.
Right.
If dominionists in the United States ever got armed and tried to rise up to make the United States a Christian dominionist country, we would be in roughly the same position that some others are in, and they would get their ass kicked by the U.S. military, provided they hadn't actually infiltrated the military, which is what they've been trying to do. You get all the problems of the Air Force Academy and other things. This is dominionists trying to get their like-minded people in control of this. Unfortunately for them, their little attempt at a conspiracy isn't likely to work because most people are decent and have moved beyond that.
Right, well, you say most people are decent, but I think it's got to do with the fact that Christians have no problem admitting that Bible is a collection of stories and they say teachings of Jesus, whereas for Muslims, the Quran is literally the word of Allah.
I don't think you went to my church.
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to. There's plenty of preachers who are happy to tell you in their congregations. There's actually this guy who put out a challenge to atheists. I think David Smalley took him up on it, where he actually listed the number of words in the King James Version and stated that it wasn't inspired by God. It was literally the words of God.
God breathed.
And then he
backtracked. Yeah.
He backtracked on all of that within the first 7 minutes of David talking to him. But you had a question about kind of reverting to theism in stress times.
Right. So probably it's going to sound weird after all this conversation, but here's the problem I face. I'm an atheist, but whenever I face with high stress situations, let's say I'm on a plane, I'm a nervous flyer, the plane is about to take off, I lose all this rational thinking, and this fear sets in, and I think about, okay, you know what, maybe there's a God, maybe, and then I, even though, this is not, let me just say this, it's not happening because of lack of knowledge. I did countless hours of research on universe and evolution and origins of life. So it's not that I lack knowledge. It's the fact that I lose all that rational thinking because of the fear.
Sure.
And another situation was I had some heart arrhythmia, and whenever those episodes came, my heart would go up to 250 beats per minute for a couple of minutes. And then it's fixed now, but I felt very close to death in those couple minutes.
At 250 beats per minute for a couple of minutes, you probably were close to death.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, what do you say? Does it make me a lesser atheist, or?
Yes, it absolutely
You're
does.
not a real
What's wrong?
atheist.
Of course not.
No, what this is what you're describing is fear. Fear messes up your head. And this is why I tell people all the time to pay attention at the ways that religion tries to make you fearful. There's a reason that they want to keep people in fear. Right? The more I can keep you afraid that any misstep. I was thinking about a week ago about some of the really stupid things that used to occupy my brain as a Christian that I was very, very concerned about, right? And I remember there was a situation where somebody was talking about swear words, right? And I can remember more than one occasion where I was involved in what we thought were, really substantial debates about whether or not, God was okay with you using substitute swears like darn instead of damn. Was that going to be all right? Or was that, just as bad? And if it was just as bad, you don't want to go to hell for saying darn, so don't even say darn, And I'm sitting here thinking, this is the kind of stuff that it makes you so afraid of any misstep, right? That you run around worrying about crap like that instead of putting your mind to real use. And if you're so afraid of retribution that this is the kind of things you're worrying about 24/7, you don't have time to sit around and really think well, is this real? Right? That's not even crossing your mind. You just don't want to go to hell. So
Right.
they also use pressure, right? Like the guy that called at first, I was trying to get him to think, like, what is the pressure to make you believe something? Why can't you wait until there's evidence that is convincing? Why do you have to make a judgment now on whether or not it's true? Because they sell you, it's like the used car salesman, and I've used this analogy before, you know, it's like this great deal on this car, but you need to sign today because this is, you know, this isn't going to last. And there were two people looking at it just an hour before you showed up on the lot, and it's pressure, right? You put people under pressure. You make them afraid. When they start thinking, wait, we're going to lose this car. This is a good deal. You don't want them to go off and look at other car deals on other lots, so you tell them a couple other people were just here, and I think they went to their bank to look at financing, and they're probably going to want this car. You sure you don't want to buy it right now? Right? So you don't want to wait, because what if you wait and you die and then there's a hell? And so you pressure the people, and you try to use the fear to force them to make a judgment, to make that call on whether or not it's true, because otherwise, if there wasn't this pressure, everybody could just sit back and say, you know, maybe they won't figure out if there's a God before I die, but oh well. And maybe maybe there's not enough evidence, but you know, until there is, I just don't feel any need to make a decision on this or to think about it and put any pressure on myself to figure out whether I believe it or not. Why would you worry about it if there wasn't pressure? So the fear is there to keep you from being able to figure it out, to keep you from thinking straight, because that's what fear does to your head. And that's what you're describing right now, is you're saying that I am not an irrational person normally, but once I get really scared, I start doing things that just aren't even me.
You go to have you ever been to a haunted house?
Right.
Have you ever been to a haunted house?
Yeah, I have, yes.
Okay, I've been to. I don't believe in ghosts, goblins, anything along those lines. And last haunted house I went to, I was mostly bored, although a couple of occasions I was startled. I don't get terrified by horror flicks. But I know plenty of people who are perfectly rational and will not go near a haunted house. They don't believe in anything supernatural or anything spooky, but there's something terrifying about it. The stress factor is human. We're all going to experience stress. The same thing with fears of the unknown. What's happened is religions have co-opted those stresses and those fears and trained people's brain that the best way to deal with them is to reach out to your imaginary friend in the sky because he can fix it for you.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just go away, because the truth is, once you free yourself from those religious beliefs, you don't have anything to replace that response to stress and fear with. Okay, I figured out that I don't believe in a God, there's no good reason for this, and now I'm in a moment of stress. What the hell do I do now? If you don't replace that indoctrination with something else, right, some other method of stress and fear management, then it's completely normal that your brain, which was trained to react in a certain way, would react that way. And what it takes is time and effort. And despite that, you may never completely free yourself of this, and it doesn't mean that you're an inferior being or that you're a lesser atheist or anything like that. It just means you're freaking human and that your brain was polluted in ways that you can't always get rid of, because not everything we do in life gives you the opportunity to pause and think rationally.
Right, and also the fact that evolution is not perfect, and the reason that I'm having those thoughts.
If it was, everybody would be bald.
Right, I mean,
right.
The reason I'm having these thoughts were maybe the same reason that the earlier human beings, tried to reach to the higher beings, right?
There were some interesting preliminary studies that I read about where they had people playing these games where they had to control balls and get them into particular holes, like on a board. So you could manipulate the board and roll the balls into holes, right? So they had these people playing this game. And whenever they would play the game, sometimes they let the people play the game unmanipulated. But other times they would let people play the game, but they had magnets that could manipulate the balls, but the people playing didn't know this. Okay, so you're playing the game and you don't even know that they might be manipulating the game. Whenever people played the game and it worked how it was supposed to work, they used language that was very objectifying, like toward the objects on the board. So they would talk about it while they were playing it, and they were encouraged to talk about it while they played it. Whenever they played the game and the balls didn't do what they were supposed to do, like you'd be rolling the ball toward the hole and then it would just go around it, and you're like, what the heck? When they were interviewed about the game and when they talked through the game, they were using language that was anthropomorphic. So they would use agency in the language of the balls, like it doesn't want to go in the hole. Or they would be saying things as though the balls had agency. Now, I'm pretty sure that the people playing the game didn't, on a conscious level, think that these balls had awareness.
And I could say that if I were in that situation, I would be using religious language, because when the ball doesn't have a magnet, it would be, oh yeah, roll a little that way, roll a little that way. And when it did, I would be going, Jesus freaking Christ, what's going on?
So people, they tended to assign the language of agency in situations where they felt that they didn't have control. And that's how this was interpreted. And there were other studies that kind of did the same thing. But the more you can't control a situation, the more likely you are to sort of assign that control somewhere else, even if it's on a subconscious level.
Or
was
hope
what
that
they
there's
were.
Control.
Yeah, it's just this idea of I don't control it. And I think that's what's, because you're describing situations where lack of control seems to be what causes your fear.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So
Being
on
a
that
plane
note,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just what Tracie was saying, being on a plane, the pilot controls the plane, not me.
Yep.
And same thing with the heart. My nervous system is sending the signals for the heart rate. So,
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you guys. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening to me and answering my questions. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. As a reminder, after the show's over, which is just going to be in a few minutes here, we're trying to get to another call or two. People get together and go to dinner at Threadgill's. They'll have the address up there. It's Easter Sunday, but I did check and they were open, so I guess they'll be heading over there. We're agency detectors, and sometimes we go a little kind of hog wild and spot it everywhere. And it makes perfect sense to me. I love that example because magnets are weird. And they make things behave in ways that you wouldn't expect. We see this in a lot of areas. I actually posted something that I got from Smarter Every Day, but I posted on Facebook the other day about some new kind of discoveries and inventions in the realm of magnets, where they're actually printing magnets so that you can have specific fields that attract and then repel just before they get together. They can be turned and then locked, depending on how the magnet's printed. There's all kinds of really cool uses for this. I don't know why, but damn it, magnets are cool.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they think.
But we all go through, actually, a phase in our childhood where that's how we understand the world, is that it's full of agency. So we assign agency to all kinds of, to everything, basically. Anything that sort of, that we perceive to be acting on us, like if we slam our hand in a door or something like that, we'll get angry. You'll see a child, like, hit the door back.
You'll see me do that.
And but it's just this idea that, they'll even say things like, it bit me. They're describing it in language, in agent language, and they go through this phase of development when they're really small, and then they sort of outgrow it, and they start to learn that some things don't have awareness.
And is it surprising to anyone that religious indoctrination seems to grab on most strongly when it's done during those ages? That if you reinforce those ideas. A lot
of those types of studies are where you get those people that say, "Oh, this God belief is ingrained." It's really about agency, the external agency. It's really just an error in interpretation of the world due to inexperience that children manifest, and yet they look at that as like, "Oh, see, God imprinted." It's like, no, God didn't imprint. It's just you pretty much treat everything like it's
you imprinted God
alive.
Upon your agency detector,
and then you start learning that not everything is like you.
Yeah. Let's try and get at least one more in here. We got Peter in London. How you doing? Are you there?
Hello, Peter.
Oh, hello.
Hey,
can you
is
hear
that
me?
Peter? Yeah.
Yeah, we've only got a few minutes left, but we thought we'd try and get to it.
Okay, yeah, nice to speak to you both again. I'd like to talk about morality, that morality is subjective.
Morality what?
It's subjective.
Okay.
Yeah, but also that there is God.
But also that there is God. Okay. So
Yeah, so just like the,
so God has an opinion about morality.
I don't know, I wouldn't word it like that.
Well, isn't that what subjective kind of means?
Okay, yeah, all right, you could word it like that.
Okay, so why should I care what God thinks about morality? I'm sorry, you're kind of breaking up.
Thing.
Hello?
Hey, Peter.
Oh, sorry.
Can you
yeah,
repeat
because God created everything.
Well, first of all, I don't know that, but also, even if God did create everything, why should I care what he thinks about morality?
Just out of due respect and love and appreciation.
Shouldn't I respect and appreciate my parents? I mean, they're the reason I'm here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so does that mean my parents are right about morality?
They might be, but it's subjective. So,
Sure. So if it's subjective, then God has an opinion about morality, and my parents have an opinion about morality, and so do I.
yeah, that's right.
So is anybody actually correct?
Well, that question's a bit like the government saying 40 miles an hour along a certain road, and then they change it to 50 miles an hour. So which one is correct?
Yeah, I understand. That's so first of all, actually it's not quite like that, because the speed limit is objectively whatever it's set at. You're confusing the fact that something could change, and it might change for arbitrary reasons. That's not a contrast between objective and subjective. Objective means this is in fact the matter of fact, independent of what any mind thinks about it. And subjective means that it is entirely contingent upon what a mind thinks about it. So if the speed limit is 55 miles an hour, it doesn't matter whether it used to be something else or it might be something else tomorrow, and it doesn't matter why and how it changes. It is an objective fact that the speed limit is 55 miles an hour because the speed limit is that, irrespective of anybody's opinion about it.
Yeah, but somebody's opinion had to set that in the first place.
Yeah, but that's irrelevant.
Can...
That's not relevant as to whether or not the fact of the speed limit is not subjective just because it came from a subjective source. So the rules of chess, for example, are arbitrary. See, we can change them, we can have house rules, whatever. But when we talk about the structured rules of chess, they're there objectively so, and you and I can both look at them, and it doesn't matter if you think that the rules are something else, right? I'm just trying to highlight the difference between objective and subjective. We'll set that aside and get back to the question that I asked, because you said that morality is subjective. So under that, my understanding is that nobody could be correct. If it is entirely subjective, meaning that it's just a matter of people's opinions about something, then there wouldn't be a right answer, right?
No, because there's a deeper thought to it, which is who has the authority to set what is right and wrong. So in the
so hang on. Now we're talking about something entirely different, because you're talking about an authority to set the rules. That's separate from whether or not the rules are subjective or objective, right?
Yeah, well, I would say all rules are subjective.
So why do I care? What gives God the right to set the rules and forces me to abide by them?
Yeah, because he's the creator.
Yeah, I don't care about that. I don't think that just because you made something, I don't think that just because you made something, you get to dictate what it does and what it should do, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's why we've got free will. So God doesn't say you have to do what he says, but he'll punish you Well, there is punishment, but there's the majority of humankind haven't known the truth, so it's based on partial knowledge of.
Whose fault is it?
Satan.
It's Satan's fault. Whose fault is it that Satan gets to control what people aren't presented with?
It's Satan's fault.
So it's not. Where did Satan come from?
God created Satan.
Yeah, so God created somebody who's blocking people from understanding the truth, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
So why isn't God responsible for that? If I create a bomb and set it running off into town, am I not responsible for that and what it does?
Not if you stop that bomb or you tell the people to move out of the way.
Sure. So I can create a bomb and send it there, and not my responsibility as long as I tell people to move. What if they don't believe me?
No, the bomb would. God hasn't set the bomb.
Okay, God hasn't created Satan then?
Yeah, but he created him with free will.
Okay. And did he know what Satan was going to do?
He chooses not to look into the future, although he has the ability.
God chooses. So you're saying God chooses not to look into the future, though he has the ability to.
That's kind of irresponsible.
Right?
No, it's just like a landlord has a key to a property, but chooses not to.
I understand. I'm asking for clarity. You just said that God has the ability to look into the future, but chooses not to. Correct?
Yes, he has no cause to.
So there's no such thing as prophecy, then, right?
No, in this situation, because Satan.
No. About this situation, is there a such thing as prophecy? Does God know the future?
Yes, God has chosen to look into the future.
God does then choose to look into the future, right?
Yeah, God has the ability,
why did you say,
and now because of.
Why did you say that God has the ability, but he chooses not to?
Yeah, because it was back then, everything was perfect and all energy creatures were obeying God. So in that circumstance, he had
Peter, you said that God has the ability to look in the future, but doesn't. And then not a minute later, you said that God does look into the future. So which is it?
Yeah, because it's situational. So
okay, how do you know?
From the Bible.
Okay. I'm not interested in what the Bible has to say.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Cheers. That's the show for this week. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I wish God could have used that key to my apartment to look into the future to see that you were going to present such a horrible argument, and we'd end the show on that note. Maybe he could have intervened to stop you, but maybe he's allowing Satan to prevent you from making good arguments and understand reality. I just don't get it.
I can't look into the future, but I want to say Josh has been holding for a super long time, like since before the show even started.
Okay. Josh, Tracie wants to take your call, so we're going overtime.
Oh, Tracie, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm so grateful. This is the perfect show for me to call in on because you guys have already alluded to many of my issues. I have a sister. I'm an atheist. I grew up in a Christian family. I was fortunate enough to have a lot of liberal teachers that taught me about Greek mythology and origin myths, and she didn't really get that. A lot of her education came from Christianity. She also has a past in like dabbling in Ouija boards and you know, sort of reaching out to the very extreme.
Occultism.
But recently, in the past year, she's joined this church, and it started with a doctor, an herbalist actually, not an actual doctor, but an herbalist who uses pressure point control and therapy, like mental therapy along with physical. And she sort of just, you know, she found my sister who was somewhat empty in a mental and emotional way, and she is filling her with her own personality, and she's invited her into this religion that, you know, they believe the world is flat. Like, they're that extreme, you know.
Do you have a name?
And they believe... I really don't know the name. I know they call themselves true Christians and say that every Christian on the planet pretty much is wrong and they don't follow. Like what you said earlier, Matt, about the Westboro Baptist Church. They're according to the doctrine, they're very accurate, and it's like that with these people. They believe there's a holy war between demons and divinity on earth, and every time you listen to a Marilyn Manson song, you're feeding demons power in the holy war or some shit.
I did find a site called Christian Flat Earth Ministry, but apart from that, I'd really be interested.
That really could be it.
Yeah. Anyway, continue.
Thank you. So I guess my question is, I really love my sister, and I've seen that she has lost her personality. She used to have, amazing taste in music and media, and she used to open her mind to different ideas about space and time and science. But now she's lost all of that. She's been through 10 different jobs this year alone. She's completely dependent on these people.
It's not even the end of March. You mean 10 jobs in the last 3 months?
Or does he mean if it's a 12-month period?
Over the past, 12-month period or so. I mean, give or take.
I just wanted to check. They're both ridiculous, but...
Right, yeah, even so, it's very quick, it's very quick. It took me maybe 5 to 6 years to completely convert to atheism, and this just took a year. They're artists.
So one of the things...
They work the mind.
Roughly what kind of jobs?
Okay, so she's trying to get into the medical field, and she didn't do well in school, so she's doing mostly caregiving work and daycare. Hospital work. Yeah,
so one of the things is usually, and first of all, cult is what the big religion calls the little religion. Let's call a spade here. But not all religions are remotely equal in the effects on the people who believe it. I'd say that the most damaging, dangerous cults, the ones to be wary of, are the ones that essentially pull the members out of society and get it so that they don't associate with people outside of the group.
That's exactly it.
That would kind of preclude the idea of 10 different jobs in the last year, unless all of those jobs were like on church property or something. So
right.
I'd say that it sounds potentially dangerous, and certainly you are right to be concerned about the effects on your sister. I mean, the people who know you best can see this, but I'm not necessarily sure how dangerous it is.
Do you have any other family, close by, or that is close with you and your sister?
We're a really small family. It's really just my 2 grandparents, my sister, and my mother, and so it's real small, and she doesn't have a big support, and our family's been, dysfunctional as every family is, but we're not as close-knit with each other as we should be, and I feel like she doesn't have a mentor, and this herbalist has become her mentor, and just so happens to be the leader of this faith. But the other thing, you mentioned the danger of it. Now, I actually do have confirmed suspicions that it's physically dangerous for my sister, because her boyfriend is actually in this group as well. And just maybe a few months ago, he was in my backyard pouring oil on himself and chanting in a state of delirium. And he had been fasting for 4 days and working out every single day. And that's what they coach. They coach that, our leaders fast for 10 days in a row, and we get closer to Jesus in that state.
So wait a minute. I'm not necessarily going to say that you're lying. I just want clarification. Her boyfriend was in your backyard covering himself with oil and dancing around. What kind of oil?
He was chanting, yeah.
Chanting.
He was sitting and praying and
what kind of oil?
Yahweh. I don't know. He said that it was an oil. It tastes, or it had a smell to it, like just sort of a perfumed sort of oil.
And he's chanting Yahweh?
Yeah, Yahweh. They're very, it's strange. They're Hebraic and Mormon and Christian. Like, they have all these different ideas. They don't celebrate holidays or birthdays. They she's purged her room of all of her expression, like posters and music. She listens to the 2 same albums every day, or
What are they?
watching propaganda.
What?
They're just so the herbalist is actually a musician, and she makes music for her church, and she has an album that talks about their beliefs. And then there's another guy, Josh Garrell.
Sure. So
I believe.
this sounds like, assuming any of it's for real, some sort of New Age syncretic combination of a number of different religions. I think the fact that her boyfriend was willing to dance around in your backyard chanting and pouring oil over him might say something about the mindset of the people involved. But the fact that he's willing to do it in your backyard makes me at least a little less worried that they're going to, abduct her and lock her away somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like
Right.
clearly if he's in your backyard, then she's still in touch with you and still maintaining a relationship with you, correct?
Well, no, they're actually, both of them are afraid of my room, because I'm kind of a nerd and I have dragons and wizards and stuff like that, and all of that is demonic. And he's even told me, like, we would get into 5-hour conversations, I kid you not, and it would end with, he would say, I would tell him he's inside of a box and he can't escape it mentally, and he would tell me that me being outside of the box is a box itself. And he would say that in that box there's a snake demon.
That's an incredible deity.
No, exactly.
'Cause it's true.
And that's like, I have a great respect for you guys because you take no bullshit, and neither do I. But the point is, and my main question to you guys is, I'm in this weird crossroads where I'm both the savior of my sister, trying to pull her out of this, and I'm her enemy, because she believes that all this is right. And so when she uses like carbon-14 or some weird like scientific fallacy against me, when she uses science and then doesn't see reason in logical argument, how do I even approach this? What tools do I have as an atheist when logic and science are out the window?
Sometimes these things just need to run their course like an illness. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with your sister, but it sounds like the type of thing that might be the flavor of the month. I mean, you say she's been at this for like about the last year?
Yeah, give or take maybe a year and a half or so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people get really into things like that, like in the first few years, and then sometimes they tend to sort of pull away a little bit. And it may not be helpful to be confrontational, and your role might actually become something of just sort of taking a sideline seat and just being supportive and letting her know that you're there. The main thing is don't push her away and don't abandon her. Like, you might have to step back and watch some things that make you really uncomfortable, but at the same time, you just want to make sure that if she makes that choice or she starts to have issues with this group and decides she wants to step out of it, that you're there for her. That's the biggest thing.
And don't assume that logic and reason are out the window, because generally speaking, they're not. What's happening is, I think almost everybody you're going to encounter is willing to accept the value of logic and proper reasoning. They're just not always willing to accept it on the subject that they're trying desperately to protect. And so then the conversation needs to shift from the specifics of what they believe or the specifics of why you don't believe it to, let's look at this from another angle. If someone were to come to you and say X, Y, and Z, how would you go about determining whether or not it's reasonable to believe that? And if they're willing to use logic and evidence and reasonable argument for other claims, then you've got somebody who actually values that, but then you get to expose that they're engaged in special pleading, that they're willing to engage proper reasoning for everything except this one thing. And instead of addressing that one thing, you address the special pleading. You say, look, there's a million different views on religion in the world. How do I go about telling which ones are right? Okay, you think you've got the right one. How do we test that? How would we test somebody else's belief? And if the methods that they're willing to use to determine all these things that they disagree with differs from the thing that they agree with, then that's what you point out. That when push comes to shove for what they believe, they seem to be throwing reason out the door. Why is that? Why is it that their particular pet belief is immune to reason when they're reasonable in every other respect. This is something in the language we talked a lot about before, but theists aren't stupid. They're not immune to reason, all of this other stuff. What they're doing is they believe something for bad reasons that they think are good reasons. And when you show that they actually care about good reasons in every other aspect of their life, except for this one where they're in conflict, now all of a sudden you've exposed that cognitive dissonance. You've shown them, holy crap, I'm engaged in some kind of special pleading here. It's not necessarily going to register right off the bat. It may take some time to sink in, but it's far more productive, in my opinion, than writing them off as unreasonable or flatly telling them that they're unable to see reason, anywhere. I mean, I'm happy to say somebody's being idiotic on an issue because we all are on something at some time. Right. I don't think anybody is an idiot about everything all the time. I don't think the people who can't have a reasoned argument about their particular religion are incapable of having reasoned arguments on other things. In fact, I think they are capable, which is the only reason I bothered to do the show in the first place. If I thought they were unreasonable and stupid and immune to discussion, I wouldn't waste my time. I'd be at home playing a video game or, something. Having sex.
Right, no.
Yeah, that's better.
But make sure she understands that the most important thing to you is just that she's your sister and
Yes.
that you're in her life and that you're there for her no matter what, and no matter, whatever happens in the future, you're there and you're willing to be her brother.
Unless the cult convinces her that you need to die. and then you have to be a little more forceful at that point.
You guys have given me the best answer that I could have gotten, and I will see myself as that support role now and not an enemy or a savior, just her brother. And you've opened my eyes to that. I appreciate that so much. And
Okay.
by the way, Matt, don't ever say you guys are just jackass atheists from Texas, because you guys really change lives, and I have a immense respect for you all there.
Thanks a lot, Josh. I appreciate it. We appreciate you waiting
Yes.
all the way through a very long show.
Oh,
All right.
Of course. It was brilliant. The perfect show.
Take care. Thanks. And that is officially it. They'll be able to roll the credits. Thanks, Tracie. Thanks to the studio audience on the other side of the fishbowl for joining us this week. We've lost 2 lights because we went on too long.
We do have 2 lights down.
If only this last light would go out like right now, that'd be awesome. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.